Palestinian recognition, new climate targets and taking on the social media giants. There's plenty on the Prime Minister's agenda over the coming days here at the United Nations. But a meeting with Donald Trump, well, that's proving more difficult to arrange. From New York, I'm David Speers. Welcome to Insiders. Well, it's going to be a fascinating week ahead here at the United Nations. The Prime Minister has now arrived in New York, and while he may not have a meeting locked in with Donald Trump, he is looking forward to his first General Assembly as Prime Minister.
It's an opportunity to advance Australia's economic, national security and, of course, our related environmental interests as well.
On those environmental interests, I'll be talking to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy, Chris Bowen, who's also here. And Laura Tingle, the ABC's Global Affairs editor, joins me too for a look at what we can expect to see happen here at the UN over the coming days. Then I'll hand back to Melissa Clarke in the studio with a terrific panel to go through the big issues of the week. And that included, of course, those new climate targets for 2035. They faced inevitable criticism from both sides. The Greens arguing the number is too low, the Coalition arguing it's too high. There are also legitimate questions around how this target of lowering emissions by 62 to 70% will be achieved. The Prime Minister's task here at the UN is to convince the world Australia is serious about climate change and it's a place worth investing in, and also somewhere that should be given the rights to host next year's huge climate summit.
Good to go, Camos?
A dire new climate change report predicts
year-round flooding,
rising sea levels,
more heat-related deaths,
and government budgets will be drained.
But the cost of inaction will always outweigh the cost of action.
Cost of action on this government's watch is costing us an arm and a leg.
Australia should play its part in reducing emissions, but not at any cost.
This is a really serious warning.
This is a lot of climate alarmism.
Just a massive exercise in scaremongering.
It certainly is a wake-up call for anyone who denies the science of climate change.
I just don't understand what is going through the minds of these dudes.
Andrew Hastie is threatening to quit the front bench.
If Susan Lee, though, supports net zero by 2050, where does that leave you?
That leaves me without a job.
It's a hypothetical question.
If we just said net zero at any cost by 2050, I think you'd find there'd be a mass exodus.
I wouldn't be much use trying to sell a policy I don't believe in.
Conversations happen, and I'm very comfortable with all of them.
Ready to go?
Ready?
Yep.
The government has announced its 2035 target.
The goal is to cut emissions by 62 to 70%.
And we think we've got the sweet spot.
We sought targets that will future-proof our industries, our economy, our way of life and our planet.
We are dead against Labor's 2035 interim emission reduction targets.
There will be criticism from some who say it's too high.
These targets cannot be met. They are fantasy.
There's some who will say that it's too low.
This target is so appallingly low.
This is ambitious.
That range is not ambitious.
A target over 70 is not achievable.
It will not keep us safe.
This is a huge economic opportunity.
The government's latest advice, staying on track to net zero, will cut household energy bills by about $1,000 a year.
Well, we've heard that before.
That's not a political promise. It's a statement of modelling.
What do you think that target should be? We don't believe in setting targets at all from opposition or from government.
So we had essentially the announcement of withdrawal from Paris.
No, I just misspoke in the answer I gave. What I meant to say was that I don't support the targets that the government sets while we're in opposition, so I misspoke.
It says it all. If the opposition aren't clear, thanks very much.
Thank you, Prime Minister.
Well, the Climate and Energy Minister, Chris Bowen, in a moment. First, let's check what's making news. And Optus is continuing to face a wall of criticism across the front pages. It's admitted ignoring 2 customer complaints about the 000 outage before finally acting after the third. 4 people died when calls couldn't get through, including a newborn baby. In the Nine papers, Fortescue's Andrew Forrest has criticised US President Donald Trump's energy policies, accusing him of kowtowing to oil and gas donors. The mining magnate is in New York pushing for a net zero emissions regime for global shipping. The US is strongly opposed to the framework. And in News Corp papers, top Republicans in the US have warned Australia and others backing Palestinian recognition they could face punitive measures. In an open letter, 25 Republican members of Congress say the move imperils Israel's security. Well, Chris Bowen has had a busy week at home unveiling those 2035 climate targets, and he faces a pretty busy week ahead here, selling the message of what Australia is doing when it comes to climate action and trying to secure the rights to host next year's big climate summit. I caught up with the Energy and Climate Minister a short while ago. Chris Bowen, welcome to the UN.
Great to be here at the UN with you, David.
And I should point out there are some protesters out on the street. Nothing to do...
Not against us.
Nothing to do with us, but that's what happens in the week of General Assembly. You might hear that from time to time. Look, I want to start obviously on climate change. It's 10 years on from the Paris Agreement being signed, and it's not on track to be met, the goals that were laid out in that agreement. The US is also withdrawing from the Paris Agreement. I mean, how would you describe where the world is at? Is enough being done on climate change?
Well, let me start with the positive. Renewable energy investment is continuing at a rapid pace. $2 trillion, double the investment in fossil fuels. Sometime this year, renewables will surpass coal as the world's largest source of energy. Sometime next year, wind and solar separately will surpass nuclear as sources of energy. So massive amounts of renewable energy investment, including obviously in China and India and in the global south in developing countries. But you're right, I mean, the world's action has taken us from a track of 4 degrees warming 10 years ago to now somewhere between 2 and 2.8. That's good progress, but not yet enough. So we've all got to keep going.
Well, let's look at the target that you announced the other day. It has faced some criticism from both ends of the spectrum.
Inevitably, David.
Well, perhaps. From those who argue it's not enough or not aligned with that goal of keeping warming below 1.5 degrees. Is the target you announced, the 62 to 70% by 2035, aligned with that goal?
Yes, and let me make a couple of points if I can. Firstly, as the Climate Change Authority said in their advice to us, and that's chaired by Matt Cairns, got the chief scientist, other eminent scientists, people with strong experience in climate, environment and business, for Australia to play its role in 1.5, we should have maximum possible effort. And then they determined maximum possible effort. Their advice to us was 62 to 70 for reasons we can go into. So maximum possible effort is what's required. Now, you can look at the IPCC over the last few reports, which has said 68% from the world is what's required. That's well within our target range. So it very much is 1.5 aligned. And also, can I make
62% wouldn't be, though.
Well, 62 to 70 is our range.
But 62%
and is our maximum effort. Now, let me just point out to you, David, and our listeners and viewers, just how ambitious it is, because I've seen some commentary from people saying it's not ambitious. And with all due respect, some people get to deliver commentary. I have to deliver results. And this is a target very much focused on results. And the results involved in this, even at 62, would be a halving of our emissions from today, a per capita halving from 2005 of about 78 or 80% per capita. It's the equivalent of taking transport emissions out of our economy twice between now and 2035. This is very ambitious. It's doable, it's achievable, as I always said it would have to be.
I'll get to that, but
yes.
If it's 62% that we hit, is that aligned with keeping warming below 1.5
Well, our
degrees?
target is 62 to 70.
Okay.
For us to play our role in keeping the world to 1.5, as a player, I dismiss those who say what we do doesn't count because we're a relatively small emitter. That just doesn't stack up. This is our maximum possible effort, which therefore means it is in keeping with the CCA advice, 1.5 aligned.
So to those who say on the other side that this is going to be too harmful to households and business and that there's not really a clear plan on how you achieve this target, would you concede that you still do need to work out a lot of how you're going to get there?
Well, we've outlined, we didn't just release a target. We released the net zero plan, 6 sector plans, some new policies, $2 billion for the Clean Energy Finance Corporation, money for EV charging, importantly a focus on energy performance and energy efficiency. Now, of course, over the next 10 years, we'll keep looking at how we're going and we'll keep, updating what is done. We're not here to pretend to you. I wouldn't pretend to you that I know exactly every movement between now and the next 10 years, you know, in every bit of technology and cost, etc.
But let me ask you this. The Climate Change Authority says renewables will have to make up more than 90% of the energy grid by 2035, within 10 years. Is that your view as well?
So let's just be clear about this, because there was one piece of advice the Climate Change Authority gave us on last Friday, which we announced last Thursday just gone, which is the target. 62 or 70, do we accept it or reject it? That's the only recommendation before us, and we obviously decided to accept
So everything else the
Everything
Climate
else,
Change Authority said doesn't necessarily mean it's your plan?
No, well, what they then did is, in their report to me, quite rightly, is ran through some of the possibilities as to what achieving that might look like. Now, of course, there is opportunity to overachieve on some things, underachieve on others, etc. Over the next 10 years, that will play out. Those things that, you know, to preempt you going through a list of all the things that they said might be possible, they are just simply CCA commentary on the sorts of things that might happen should we meet that target.
Okay, but I'll still go through some of them, because this is a pretty important one. Will we need more than 90% renewables over the next decade?
Obviously
is that because you had a target for 2030 of 82% renewables?
Correct.
You keep talking about that.
Yes.
What's the target for 2035?
Well, if you look at the ISP, we'll keep going after 2030. I'm confident we'll reach the 82% in 2030 target, right? I know there's plenty of commentary saying we won't, and it's an ongoing challenge. I'm not pretending it's easy or automatic, but if you look at the sorts of things we're doing, you know, last year 4.4 gigawatts of new energy added to the grid, a pipeline of 15 gigawatts, that's a lot. 1,000 Australians a day putting in a home battery now. Half of those roughly are putting solar on the roof for the first time as well. So we're making good progress, but yes, you know, I'm not here putting my feet on the desk saying that's done. That remains an ongoing challenge.
So what's the 2035 target for renewables?
Well, we haven't set a particular target.
Why not?
Well, what we have done is set our emissions reduction target, and then we'll continue to deliver.
But you've had a renewables target for 2030.
Yes.
And that's difficult, as you say. Is it so difficult that you don't want to set one for 2035?
What we have done is I've set up a NEM review led by Professor Tim Nelson, which is looking at the settings beyond 2030. It's done that review led by Professor Nelson. It's done an excellent job. It's been very widely and warmly received across the energy market, which is a bit unusual to have a report which everyone says, usually they've done a good job. So that will govern our approach.
But no target?
That will govern our approach from 2030 to 2035. Obviously, once we get to 82% renewable in 2030, which I, you know, am working towards achieving and have some confidence we will achieve, then we'll keep going to ensure that we have a reliable grid and a cheaper grid, and that means more renewables.
Okay, but I still don't know why you have a target for 2030 but not 2035.
Well, because we set the 2030 target for renewable energy. We're still working to achieve that, and we'll update plans as we go, informed by the ISP, GenCost, the expert advice.
So it could be less than 90%?
Well, I think informed by the expert advice, David, is the correct, proper and methodical way of doing these things.
Which could be less than 90%?
Well, you could say it could be less, could be more.
I'm asking you.
Well, obviously, 82 is a high number. I will say this, David, when you get to a number like 82, and then to continue to go after that, you've got to keep working. You know, the low-hanging fruit, if you like, disappears.
Well, to that end, okay. So to that end, again, the Climate Change Authority says wind power needs to quadruple. Now, you've had a lot of trouble rolling out the wind power to date for all sorts of reasons that we know. There's the environmental approvals, there's the community concerns, all of this. Is it possible to quadruple wind power?
Well, I mean, that's one of the metrics they put out as a possibility. They also said 6 times, I think, increase in grid-scale storage. Now, that is a big lift, but again, we're making huge progress. Just last week, amongst the many things I announced, the latest capacity investment scheme auction for 16 very big batteries right across the country. Again, a lot of gigawatt hours of support for 3.5, it would equivalent to cover 3.5 million homes in the peak. So you can look at that. They also, I think it's double the rooftop solar rate that we have at the moment. And again, we're making good progress.
Okay, but can you do these things?
South Australia just hit 50% of South Australian houses now have solar on their roofs.
But should regional Australia expect a quadrupling of wind power?
Well, I think what regional Australia should expect is we'll continue to work with them, yes, to expand renewable energy, no question about that. We'll work with them on community consultation, on planning, which is more a state issue, but...
should they expect a quadrupling of wind power?
Well, they should expect us to continue to work for more renewable energy, but they should also expect us to be saying the projects will be in the right place at the right time. You know, not every proposal is in the right place. The planning system is there for a reason. It's not automatic approvals. Murray Watt is working on planning reforms, but that's not going to be about automatic approvals. That's going to be faster, Or,
So again,
yes or no.
It might not be a quadrupling of wind power.
Well, again, that's one of the, it comes back to my original point. Climate Change Authority had commentary in there about the sorts of things we could expect. Actually, what we look at is the ISP and its plans going forward. That'll be updated in the coming period.
Again, this comes back to whether you have a plan to hit this target or not, doesn't it?
Well, again, net zero plan, energy sector plan, industry sector plan, all out on Thursday. I'm sure many people haven't had a chance to look at it yet.
Okay, but you can't say what renewables will be or need to be. You can't say how much wind power they'll have to be. What about electric vehicles? Again, the authority says half of new cars sold between now and 2035 will need to be electric vehicles.
Well, we've never had an EV sales target, and we don't have an EV sales target because we believe in choice. I do note that many manufacturers are withdrawing internal combustion engines in the 2030s. They won't be available for sale, right? So the market will...
So this will automatically happen.
The market will drive a lot of behaviour, but so will our new vehicle efficiency standard, which is already driving many more models available for Australians. EV sales are about 1% when we came to office, about 10% now. I'm pleased with that. Obviously, I want to see a high take-up, but we're not about mandating a particular sales level because I think Australians should make that choice.
Can you do all of this without having to spend any more taxpayers' money beyond what's been committed? The Prime Minister seemed to say the other day that no more would be...
Well, we certainly see the vast majority of investment coming from the private sector. That's what the Prime Minister said, and he's right about that. But we see a role for us to unlock that investment. So take the CESC, for example. You know, it spends, say, $4 billion to unlock $12 billion of private sector investment, creating 4,000 jobs. That's the sort of approach we can take. The Treasurer and I released the Cleaner Fuels program during the week as well, $1.1 billion investment. Now, the $1.1 billion won't build the cleaner fuels industry in Australia. Private sector investment will. And that $1.1 billion will unlock it and unleash it.
But will there need to be more, is the question?
Well, no, the budget papers outline our, plus the $8 billion we announced during the week, which is no small amount. Again, those who said we're not doing enough, we just put $8 billion out the door, a little bit more. That takes our total investment to $75 billion. That's a lot, but that's what we've decided to do. That's our plan.
And that's it?
And that's what we're sticking to.
And is that it?
Well, that's what we think we need to do at this point.
At this point?
Yeah.
There might be
more. We haven't announced the health or educational defence budgets for the next 20 years either.
No, but the PM did say the other day
the PM's right.
There would be no more.
The PM's right. We have made the decisions. They're all announced, and we expect that money to unlock very much larger amounts of private sector money.
But you might have to spend more.
That's what the Prime Minister said, and that's what I'm saying.
But you might have to spend more.
Well, what we said is what we have decided to spend is what we've announced. Okay. Everything we've decided to do is what we've announced.
You've acknowledged that support for this target will live or die basically on how people feel about their power prices.
Sure.
When will they start to fall, I guess is the question.
Well, we're already seeing impacts of policies with downward pressure on prices. So, for example, the 60,000 Australians who put a home battery in since 1 July, that's helped them. Many of those people will never get an energy bill again in their lives.
A lot of people can't afford that, even with the rebate.
But they're also helping the rest of the grid, those who haven't got batteries, because with 60,000 fewer homes calling on the grid at night, that's a lot less people calling on coal and gas, which is the most expensive form of energy
when do they see that?
In the gas.
We're
already starting to see early signs of that having an impact, but we'll see more with the next default market offer. We'll see that play out.
We'll see the prices come down?
Well, we'll see it play out over coming years. If you look at, again, what the experts say, this is not a political promise. The Australian Energy Market Corporation, with all their work, and this has effectively been backed by the Treasury, found energy prices coming down 13% if we stick with the plan of rolling out more of the renewable energy over the next decade.
Do you think those who say we should abandon Paris, drop the net zero target, are cranks and crackpots?
I think there's both. I think there's people of bad faith in Australian politics exploiting this issue. The National Party, they are, in my view, betraying regional Australia, which, as the National Risk Assessment I put out during the week showed, people in regional Australia have a lot at stake in dealing with climate change. Farmers know that. I think the National Party betrays farmers and people in regional areas when they engage in this cheap politics. There are people with genuine concerns and issues which need to be worked through, and we've got to communicate to those people and correct the disinformation that people like Barnaby Joyce and Matt Canavan and Colin Boyce, National Party MP this week, said climate change isn't real, denied climate change, member of the Alternative Government of Australia. We've got to correct that disinformation. So people going about their business hearing that disinformation, they've got to hear from the rest of us about why it's wrong. So There are people who, there are people who engage in climate change denial, who just ignore all the science, and I think that's deeply unfortunate. I don't have any respect for that. For genuine Australians going about their business, listening to the debate who are confused, of course, I have respect for what they are concerned about and the need to give them the correct and factual information against the disinformation they hear from so many on the right of politics.
Do you have respect for Donald Trump on this issue?
Well, the President has views about this, about climate change. I have my views. I'm not here to comment on the views of others in other political systems. I'll comment on the views of my opponents and colleagues in Australia. And I don't have much respect for those in federal politics who engage in climate change denial, soft or hard.
Is it true the Treasury modelling the government produced is based on the US staying in Paris and continuing with emissions reduction?
Well, the Treasury modelling is based on world action, and we are seeing world action.
Yeah, but is it based on a time when the US was still committed to the Paris Agreement?
The Treasury modelling is based on other countries and trading partners of ours reducing their reliance on fossil fuels, which I think is the...
But is it out of date with Trump?
No, because I think as the evidence, I opened with the fact that renewable energy is double fossil fuel investment, for example, and that renewables will surpass coal this year as the world's largest source of energy. The Treasury modelling isn't based on any political decisions by any other countries, the United States or anybody else. It's based on the practical, real market facts.
The climate summit that Australia wants to host next year, Turkey still has not pulled out of this contest. What's going to happen this week on that? Will Australia end up winning this summit?
We have discussions with our Turkish friends this week. We have overwhelming support for our bid. This situation hasn't really changed for a while, David. We have the overwhelming support from countries around the world for our bid. But
you just need Turkey to drop out.
Well, the UNFCCC rules rely on consensus, and that means really, yes, the two bidding countries sorting it out.
Otherwise, so how do you convince them to get out?
Otherwise, it goes to Bonn in Germany, which would be an unfortunate result. I'm not going to negotiate with my Turkish counterpart, with all due respect, as much as I love and respect you, David, through you here on the lawns of the UN.
Why not?
I'll do it privately with him.
Just a couple of other issues outside your portfolio, but coming up here at the UN, obviously the PM is here to also recognise Palestinian statehood, along with the leaders of Canada, the UK and France. A bunch of Republicans in Congress here in the United States have written an open letter warning that this is a move that's going to imperil Israel's security and that there could be consequences from doing so. Does that worry you at all?
Well, we obviously have set Australia's foreign policy based on our interests and our values. And while everyone's entitled to their views, we will determine Australian foreign policy, not anyone else. And we've determined a couple of things: that the time is right, in concert, as you said, with like-minded countries. We've been waiting 80 years for a two-state solution, and that we now see recognising Palestine as a step towards the two-state solution, not the result of negotiations. And to your question, I believe that Israel will be truly free and secure when Palestine is. That's what I believe, and vice versa. And vice versa, that these two states have to come to a peaceful coexistence, understanding. We're a long way from that as we speak, and we believe, as other countries have reached a similar conclusion, that recognising Palestine this week is a meaningful step forward to that two-state solution which has eluded us for 80 years.
And finally, the Prime Minister's clearly hoping to meet with Donald Trump, and no doubt we'll run into him and have a handshake, but a sit-down meeting, there's still nothing scheduled. How much does this concern you?
Well, I just point to this, David. There are plenty of world leaders who've met with Donald Trump who haven't had good outcomes, who've got very high tariffs, who've come over and had meetings and left optimistic and then have got high tariffs. The way Anthony Albanese has managed the relationship, we had the world's lowest tariff on Australia.
So a meeting doesn't matter?
Results matter. Results matter.
Not the meeting.
Results matter, David. I mean, of course, the Prime Minister's made it clear he's very happy to meet, but results matter. And this Prime Minister and this Foreign Minister and this government have delivered pretty good results when it comes to the bilateral relationship.
It sounds like a sit-down meeting then is not a priority necessarily.
It's not my place to announce these things, David. I'm the humble
cabinet minister. But as a cabinet minister, it's not a priority for you to see this happen.
Of course, meeting with the President is always a good thing. But I'll tell you what's even more important is results. I'd much rather Anthony Albanese get a great result for our economy with the world's lowest tariff without a meeting than to have a meeting and get the opposite result, which is what many other world leaders have found themselves in that situation.
Chris Bowen, wish you well for the week ahead here at the UN.
Plenty happening. Good to be with you.
There is plenty happening, and particularly on the climate front, but that's not the only issue on the agenda at this UN General Assembly. And I'm very pleased to say Laura Tingle, the ABC's Global Affairs editor, is with us now to have a look at what is coming up. Lovely to be here on the banks of the East River at the UN, Laura.
Very scenic, David.
What a spot it is indeed. Look, let's start with climate before we get on to some of the other issues. And Mel, Clarke and the panel will go through the details on the argument around the target that was announced during the week. But globally here, we heard Chris Bowen arguing what Australia's doing is, amongst the ambitious nations in the world. Is it? How do we compare now to what the world is doing on climate change? And has Donald Trump's move stalled global action?
Well, we are actually amongst the most ambitious in a way. I mean, countries like Japan, Canada, New Zealand all got much lower targets announced. And interestingly, this of course all started in Paris in 2015, and it's emerged that the French were amongst the group of countries that basically forced the EU to fail to meet the deadline for giving its targets out. It's only been able to give a statement of intent. So there is a bit of a back-off going on in some parts of the world. Donald Trump pulling out obviously doesn't help, but I think one of the interesting things about that Treasury modelling, David, is that's happened in Australia is that it's showing that our gas and coal exports will be 50% lower in the next 5 years, which is a really big wake-up call in terms of what our own energy needs will be. And it sort of shows how much of a change there's going on in the world, demand for dirty fuels and clean ones. So it suggests that the targets have been working well. Whether they continue to work with quite so much momentum is unclear.
We'll see. On Palestinian recognition, Laura, this was flagged 5 or 6 weeks ago by the Prime Minister that we would join the UK, Canada and France in recognising Palestinian statehood. That's going to happen here at the UN in the coming few days. The whole idea was to generate momentum towards a two-state solution and peace in Gaza. Is it clear that's what is happening as a result of this?
Well, as Gaza continues to get bulldozed, you'd sort of think not. But without a doubt, there are two targets in this. One of them is Israel, but the other one is the United States. Now, defenders of this would say that 3 or 4 months ago it would have been regarded as impossible or very unlikely at best for countries like Australia to be recognising Palestine. So it has actually achieved some momentum. Where does it go from here? Well, obviously the rest of the world is in this position with Donald Trump on all issues where they're just thinking whatever we can do, we have to do. So it will probably provide some sort of push there. We don't expect it to actually produce any further outcomes, but there is a change going on in the world. We're seeing this shift into people talking about the South African apartheid moment with...
Well, we seem to be having an issue there in New York, but I'm happy to say back here in Canberra we can jump in and have a chat about all of the things happening not only in the UN General Assembly but also here in Canberra through the course of the week. But I think we can come back to David Speers and Laura Tingle for a bit more analysis first.
Thank you, Mel. Apologies for the dropout there. Laura, I just wanted to ask you about a couple of other things before we hand back to the studio. When we talk about Palestinian recognition or climate change, Donald Trump looms over all of these issues, and Anthony Albanese is pursuing quite a different position to the US President on these issues. Is this part of what the Prime Minister has been talking about with his more independent foreign policy approach?
Well, I think it is. I don't think he's going around saying what issues can I take up which will really irritate Donald Trump. But at the same time, he is making it quite clear that Australia does have its own interests in these issues and it's not going to kowtow to what Donald Trump wants. Would the Australian public either want the Prime Minister to be doing that in general, or would they want him to be doing that on any of these specific issues? And the meeting, he doesn't have a meeting scheduled. He sort of says, oh, look, we talk on the phone, that's all going fine, we'll meet eventually, there's summits coming up. But does it start to look a bit odd at this point? It looks a bit odd on one level, but given that Donald Trump is sort of being seen in increasingly alarming terms around the world by his various interventions that aren't all working, the sort of value of meeting with Donald Trump, I think, sort of diminishes by the day. But it will continue to be something that pesters the Prime Minister.
Final one, Laura. The big issue here over the last few days in the US politically has been this question about free speech after the talk show host Jimmy Kimmel was pulled off air for making comments about the killing of Charlie Kirk. It's really stirred something as to whether we are seeing under Trump a real threat to free speech. How are you seeing it?
Well, I mean, it is pretty huge. I mean, the President was talking the other day about it being illegal to criticise him, which is extraordinary. The threats are being made against...
Illegal to criticise the President?
Illegal to criticise the President. There are threats being made to the licences of the major broadcasters, but it's not also just at that level. In America now, we've got people being, the cancel culture thing working in reverse now.
On the right.
On the right, and people are being sacked from their jobs, policemen, nurses, people on local councils, they're all being threatened with a sack or are actually being sacked because they may have made some sort of comment about Charlie Kirk's killing on social media. So it's really, I think, galvanised the issue at a very basic level, where people are going, wait a minute, is this good enough? And we're seeing some people on the right now starting to pull back from it.
Laura Tingle, thank you and good luck with the coverage over the coming week here at the UN. Appreciate that. We will have all the action from the General Assembly covered on all the ABC platforms, so do stay with us. We'll hand back to Melissa Clarke now in the studio for the rest of the show.
Thanks very much, David. And yes, from the banks of the scenic East River there to humble Canberra near the Molonglo River here. It's not quite the same, but there's plenty to go through in federal politics, both what's happening overseas and back here in Canberra. So Peter Hartcher from The Age and Sydney Morning Herald, thanks for being on the couch. Katina Curtis from the West Australian and Jennifer Hewett from the Australian Financial Review. We've got a lot to get through. Let's start with the UN General Assembly. Obviously, globally, one of the biggest issues will be Palestine, and Australia has a role in that, in moving to recognise Palestinian statehood. How consequential is this moment for Anthony Albanese in this global issue?
Well, I think it's certainly consequential in domestic politics, but as Chris Bowen said, the government's going to say this is a step towards the elusive two-state solution. It is not a step towards an elusive two-state solution at all. It's going to probably only further harden Palestinian and Hamas resistance to the idea of Israel, and of course in Israel under the Netanyahu government, their actions not just in Gaza and the West Bank just show how uncompromising they are. So although it's important in domestic politics, and of course Australia is in the company of many others, as countries around the world get incredibly frustrated with the Netanyahu government's approach, the idea that this is actually going to make any difference on the ground is, I'm afraid, elusive as well.
And domestically, Peter, does it have more consequence in a domestic foreign policy setting?
In terms of immediate consequences, yes. As Jennifer says, the actual on-the-ground consequences in Gaza are currently irrelevant as long as Netanyahu is dependent on the far-right coalition colleagues to stay in power. His aggression and repression of Gaza will continue. But in domestic politics, it's very much a live issue, and Albanese and Penny Wong have had to manage the Labor caucus, which so far has remained remarkably united and disciplined on this issue. But the government had to deliver some sort of progress, measurable progress, to appease, satisfy the left faction in the Labor Party, and that's what this is a direct outgrowth of. It just so happens that Australia is doing it at the same time as the French, the British, the Canadians, so it has international political cover and will put about 80% of the world's governments now in favour of recognition or actually recognising a Palestinian state.
And Katina, as controversial as this is, there's a lot on the agenda for the Prime Minister on this trip as a whole. So while there'll be some parts of the Australian public who are very focused on this aspect, the government wants to talk about other issues at the UN too.
That's right. He's actually spending quite a lot of days in New York, relatively speaking. He'll be there all the way till Wednesday local time. So they're actually kicking off. They are starting with the Palestine question at the start, and actually Penny Wong is is going to start that on, it'll be overnight our time tonight, with a new declaration around humanitarian workers that we've joined up with a bunch of other countries. This was started after Zomi Frankham's death, and it's actually aimed at offering some practical ways that people can help protect humanitarian workers. But that will sort of flow into then this more formal two-state solution conference tomorrow, where we think that's where the PM's going to, make Australia's formal declaration. Tuesday is kind of all about Donald Trump, because he's speaking, and that's when we'll have this cocktail reception where they may or may not meet. I mean, very much, we heard Chris Bowen earlier, like the government's really playing down any expectations whatsoever. I think they're feeling a bit burned after Canada in June, where, there was supposed to be a meeting and then Trump ran away, and then it was all a bit like, what do we do instead? And then, but social media as well is like, that's the PM's stated big focus, and talking about what we're doing in terms of the social media ban, kind of sharing our experiences with other countries. I mean, it's a little bit like the ban hasn't actually even come in place. I think there's still serious questions about whether it's actually going to work. But nevertheless, we are going to talk to other countries about how we're doing this. On the Trump thing, I think, the PM has been saying for kind of basically since Canada didn't happen, that he's got all these, all these opportunities at all these summits coming up to catch up with Donald Trump. There were sort of 4 summits on the agenda. The UN's one of them. We've got APEC and ASEAN at the end of the month, and then the G20 later. But Trump's already said he's not going to G20. He's going to send JD Vance, so that's out. APEC and ASEAN, I mean, I'd be quite surprised whether if Trump did go to ASEAN, and it's probably up in the air whether he goes to APEC or not. The Quad Summit seems like it's off the table. Like, we're getting rapidly diminishing chances to have a kind of just accidentally bump into him at one of these things.
But we've perhaps had the best indication so far that it's least on the mind of Donald Trump, because we had the ABC's Washington editor John Lyons question Donald Trump, and Donald Trump very much upbraided John Lyons about that questioning, but he did seem to confirm that a meeting was on his radar.
In my opinion, you are hurting Australia very much right now, and they want to get along with me. Your leader is coming over to see me very soon. I'm going to tell him about you. You set a very bad tone.
Well,
go ahead,
President
John.
Trump, when the UAE does a deal like that,
you can set a nicer
when the UAE does a deal, what does it want in return?
Quiet.
Quiet. But he did say, I'm going to tell Anthony Albanese about you. So even if he's going to be the principal telling off the schoolboy, does that mean a meeting is going to happen if Donald Trump's thinking about it?
Well, I must say, in Donald Trump's America, trying to predict anything is very difficult. I mean, I think it seems at the moment most likely that there'll be a handshake, a bit of a photograph at a reception party. That hardly counts really, but at least it'll give Albanese some imagery to talk about. But to Chris Bowen's point, actually, it is also true that a meeting doesn't necessarily mean a good outcome. Now, it helps that Trump seems to be personally, reasonably well disposed to Australia, and to Albanese. But something he could be in his bonnet about our level of defence spending, which is quite possible as well. So, no, there'll be. I doubt there'll be a meeting. Don't want to be too kind of definitive on that. And the Liberals will obviously make a big deal of that. It is awkward. It is embarrassing for Australia. But as there is also that issue of results, and that in Trump's America at the moment is a big issue. But at the same time, Trump's got so many other things going on. Australia's the least of his concerns.
Peter, what are those domestic responses that we might see from the coalition if this meeting doesn't go ahead?
Well, either way, the coalition will continue to torment Albanese on this. If it doesn't happen, why is he so pathetic and weak? Why won't the president meet him? Why is he neglecting Australia's most important security partnership? If he does meet, they'll find some way to paint it as inadequate. My understanding is that there is a meeting scheduled. The government, look, the adage that happiness is a function of expectations. The government's had a couple of bruising reminders of that in recent times, notably most recently in Papua New Guinea, where the government was talking up for weeks the imminence of a major defence agreement, which of course collapsed at the last minute. So in this case, they're being very sort of voce about it, not being silent about it. My understanding is that there is a meeting scheduled. If it doesn't happen, and it's a handshake at a cocktail party, Albanese, I don't think, will be disturbed because, handling Donald Trump...
It's the low-risk outcome, right, if that's all that happens.
This is an exercise in risk management, right? I mean, it's like handling a stick of jelly bean. It's a high-risk, volatile explosive. What's in it for him to meet, apart from the presentation, the photograph? It's a much higher risk. And, Jennifer mentioned, what if Trump chooses to blow up over Australian defence spending? Well, what if he chooses to blow up over the other issues that Katina was just running us through?
Social media.
The US has said, Trump personally has said, he will take action against any country that limits the freedom of American tech companies, the social media ban. He's against any countries that want to recognise a Palestinian state. Well, that's what Albanese is doing. The PBO, Pharmaceutical Benefits, PBS scheme.
So is the best diplomacy no diplomacy at all?
Albanese has not been anxious to get to Donald Trump for that exact reason. Nobody wants to be the next Zelensky or the next Cyril Ramaphosa, the South African, who was ambushed in the Oval Office.
Well, it's not the only difficult foreign policy area that the Prime Minister's had to deal with. As you alluded to, we've had the PNG Defence Treaty that wasn't signed as expected, and a couple of days before that, he flew all the way to Vanuatu only to find that the Nakamal security agreement wasn't being signed either. Katina, is the Prime Minister having a whole bunch of misses at this point on the foreign policy front?
It certainly doesn't look good for Australia. On the PNG one, I thought it was really interesting that both the Prime Minister and Papua New Guinea's leader, James Marape, were keen to emphasise that it was PNG who had asked for this. They came to Australia around Christmas time, so not actually that long ago, and said, we want to do this, have this alliance. It would be hugely significant, but the fact that it didn't come together at the time when they wanted it to, it's a failing on the PNG side as well. But for the domestic view of Anthony Albanese going overseas to have 2 fails in 2 weeks doesn't look good domestically, right?
And that was the expectations that had been set up, if we talk about expectations management. Jennifer, we certainly had the expectation of the Prime Minister in having those trips that it was going to, that both were going to happen.
Yes, I must say it's a little kind of alarming to think that there were no warning signals kind of happening from people on the ground, Australian people on the ground, saying, be a bit cautious about this. There are all these subterranean things. And of course, a lot of it is domestic politics in those countries as well. So I found it a little odd that we seem to be completely blindsided, certainly by what happened in PNG.
All right, let's move on to climate change, because that obviously, as we've heard from Chris Bowen in the earlier interview, is a key for the federal government this week and in international affairs. Peter, the 62 to 70% target range doesn't seem to have kept everyone happy.
No, absolutely not. The Greens want net zero by 2035. They'd have it by yesterday. So that's not feasible, but that's their position, and the coalition doesn't know what it supports, but it knows what it opposes. Essentially anything the government says or does on climate change, and that target in particular. The positioning, therefore, makes it dead easy for Albanese to appear centrist, reasonable. I thought the most striking and notable reaction was from the business community, where the 3 big industry groupings, representing the biggest companies down to medium, smaller companies, all said that while this target was ambitious or challenging, that it was feasible, and that they all pleaded to the political system to please give us the certainty. So let's stick with this. We need certainty to invest, plan, and make money. Can we please have some certainty?
I think it's...
They're not going to get it out of the political system.
Well, also, frankly, they're not going to get it out of the energy system either. So much of this modelling depends on what assumptions you put in, what changes in technology, and what we've seen so far is that much of that has been wrong. I think the business community, in many ways, has also, read the writing about the election. They're dealing with the government. They were much more nervous that they were going to be dealing with a 75% range. And so this target is, been expanded, so it has a little bit of everything for everybody. You know, you can kind of go 62. Well, you know, the business community says, oh, well, that's going to be very hard, but it's not as bad as, you know, something above 70, which would have been impossible for us. And it's got a 7 in there, so the government can kind of claim some type of credibility. It doesn't mean that even at 62% that this is doable, achievable at all. It's going to be very, very hard. I don't frankly think it is achievable. If you look at what's happened in the last 4 years, emissions have flatlined, that nothing has moved, and it's only going to get harder from here despite what's happening with EVs and things like that. So it doesn't mean that we're not all moving in a direction, and that is true. But emissions, global emissions, went up last year. They didn't go down because of what was happening in China and India, and that was even with the Biden administration. But, you know, I mean, we're all moving in one direction, but the pace of it is going to be very much more.
Certainly, and there's a lot of questions about the detail of how this is achieved, which, you know, David Speers went through it at some length with Chris Bowen a bit earlier. From the opposition, though, we've seen a very strong response from Susan Lee, saying the party is united in their rejection of this broad-ranging target. But Susan Lee got herself into a little bit of difficulty in holding a press conference to talk about this, because she initially suggested one thing about targets and then later on had to come back and mop it up.
We don't believe in setting targets at all from opposition or from government, because the reality is that energy policy is not about a target that is never going to be reached. What I meant to say was that I don't support the targets that the government sets while we're in opposition.
So targets in general, okay, not us setting them while we're in opposition. Katina, I think that's what Susan Lee was trying to say. How are the coalition faring in trying to hold the government to account on this target when climate change is such a difficult issue for their own party?
It's a big problem, and all the questions to Susan Lee have basically been, you say the government doesn't have any credibility. How can you have any credibility? As I understand it, the mop-up position, the thing about, well, we won't set any targets in opposition, but of course we do them in government when we have all the information. That was what was agreed at Shadow Cabinet in the submission the day before. You know, the expressions on the faces of Anne Ruston and Dean Smith behind her there, a bit perplexed. And I was struck as well, you know, she actually got a lot of questions. The journalists were very quick to pick up on what saying we wouldn't set targets in government would mean in terms of Australia and the Paris Agreement. But she didn't, for whatever reason, she didn't twig that she'd said something wrong until she walked away and had to come back again. The internals on this are very troubling for the coalition, and it's a lot about, you know, positioning around the future direction of the party. There's definitely a chunk inside the coalition party room, inside the Liberals even, who think that somehow there is a pathway to government without winning back city seats, and those sort of more moderate voters. I mean, I don't see how that's possible just numerically, but they definitely think that, and that's why there's, you know, they're agitating to being like, we don't need to worry about that climate stuff. We can get people back without it.
Jennifer, how much of it is a problem for the coalition that the party is still so split on the bigger question of reaching net zero by 2050? We saw Andrew Hastie, senior frontbencher, during the course of the week suggest if the party decided to stick with that target, he wouldn't be able to serve on the front bench at all. Was he trying to manoeuvre Susan Lee into a policy position, or was he stating a fact of the division they're facing at the moment?
I think he was stating a fact of the division they're facing and his own views. I mean, but the thing is, this is absolutely catastrophic for the Liberal Party, because it just means that the government can keep on saying, look, they're just climate change deniers. And the fact is, most people, they might not understand exactly how we're going to get there, but that most people in Australia still think the idea of net zero by 2050 is good. It's very vague how that happens, but as a kind of political idea, it's still popular. Well, it means, of course, that the coalition can't concentrate on what is far more politically, would be advantageous for them in saying, look, we believe in 2050, but, what the government's doing in 2035, your power bills are going to go up, industry's going to be destroyed, all of that type of thing. They don't need to, they're not able to get that space to even begin to have that debate.
I'm glad you mentioned that because obviously pricing around climate policy was a very big issue at the last election campaign. Anthony Albanese was asked about it at a press conference this week and, well, this is how it played out.
Prime Minister, you say this will put downward pressure on energy prices. By what exact figure will they drop?
You yourself laughed when you asked that question, so it should be treated in the spirit in which you've done. What we know is, if we don't act, there will be a cost to the economy.
Peter, the Prime Minister there laughing off questions about the costs to households. Is he going to be able to get away with that?
No. It is telling that he finds his own past position on this laughable, he himself. So we heard earlier David's interview with Chris Bowen. Chris Bowen saying that electricity prices would come down by 13% if the rollout of renewable energy proceeds as planned. But when David asked, well, what is the rollout plan, there's a yawning gap between the 13% promise and any demonstrable way of achieving it. This is, if you like, the fallen electric wire snaking around, sparking. Anybody who picks it up, electricity prices, and the government's got to pick that up. That's now their job. It threatens to kill them. Can I just quickly pick up a point that Jennifer made?
Yep.
Part of the sort of coached helplessness that the Nats and a lot of the people opposed to emissions reduction have engaged in is always to say, doesn't matter what Australia does, the Chinese are still building up their emissions, which they had been doing, and they had reserved a position where they reserved the right to continue increasing emissions to 2030. But there are indications that China's emissions peaked this year and have started to fall. China's the biggest emitter, 30% of all global emissions. Now, if that's confirmed, that changes the whole picture.
Very briefly, we did see Susan Lee give a speech this week trying to outline her economic vision for the term ahead. Katina, is this Susan Lee trying to come back to an issue that the Liberals are a little more united on than, say, climate policy? Is she going to be able to keep the focus on economic issues while all of this division is happening around climate policy?
It absolutely was trying to change the story. I understand she's going to give some more of these sort of speeches, a couple more before the end of the year, next one on sort of defence and national security. She's trying to lay out markers of where the party sits. It worked for Anthony Albanese as a, sort of procedure when he was in opposition. He didn't have that fighting in the back room behind him, though. So she, I don't think anyone really paid that much attention to her speech because of the climate stuff and, people coming out immediately and saying, we can't possibly do this.
All right, well, we'll have final observations soon, but for now, it's time for Mike Bowers with Talking Pictures.
I'm Mike Bowers and I'm photographer at large for the New Daily. I'm talking pictures this morning with writer, broadcaster and playwright Benjamin Law, and a very warm welcome back.
Thanks for having me, Mike.
Ben, the National Climate Risk Assessment was released this week.
I know that when I was listening to the reports about it, I think I left my body a bit, just trying to process what all this information meant for humanity.
But, there's such other good news in the world, isn't there?
Yeah, exactly.
Top-notch work from Matt Golding here. It also comes in audiobook, which is basically just people screaming. Who do you think they should get to voice the audiobook? Maybe Bob Catter.
He'd be perfect for recording the audiobook. He can just release screams eternally. It's like he's got circular breathing, so he'd be perfect.
The audiobook of the Climate Risk Assessment.
Primal screaming with Bob Catter.
Harry Bruce from the Townsville Bulletin and Cairns Post has hit the nail on the head, I believe, here, as he's got Worrywart from 2025.
Scaremonger for 2030.
And Panic Merchant as the water rises in 2035.
And then in 2050, why didn't you warn us earlier? Yeah. We could go further in the past and the captions would still be the same.
David Pope has really put a stellar performance in with this one. It's missed it by that much. Oh, what a pity. We've already posted our approvals for the North West Shelf gas emissions expansion as the National Climate Risk Assessment arrives steaming.
And if you pay close attention, you'll see the letterbox is not just a regular Australia Post. That is gone by Express. Yeah.
Kathy has nailed it here. The latest climate risk assessment says without drastic greenhouse emission reduction, we can expect
a huge increase in deaths from heat stress, more coastal flooding, storms and extreme weather events.
Sea level rises will displace coastal dwellers and inhabitants of nearby island states, and
our property values could fall by as much as $611 billion.
Yeah, that's bound to get the Australians' attention.
I mean, this is the national conversation at this stage.
This really is. Ben, the coalition remains divided on net zero, and this week Susan Lee faced a hasty decision. They still seem to be squabbling amongst themselves about it. David Rowe has drawn Titanic. Candidates and children first.
Susan Lee with Keep On Kicking with the door that I think Leonardo DiCaprio had to wedge himself off and drowned.
We've got Chris Bowen over here. When you're ready, Andrew. Andrew?
True. And here we've got Jacinta Price with her amazing cape.
Yep.
And behind, is it Angus?
It's Angus doing the I'm the King of the World.
Holding on tight. I mean, dead ringers for Leo and Kate, really.
I did love this single deck chair here, so you can't even shuffle.
There's nothing to shuffle.
There's nothing to shuffle. First class here from Fiona Katauskas. They say they're against net zero, but it's amazing how they keep coming back to it.
The sign here says, days since Susan Lee was publicly undermined by her coalition colleagues, and it's gone back to zero.
Yeah.
I think that might be flipping for the weeks and months ahead.
Yeah. Ben, the PM went to PNG to celebrate 50 years of independence, but he didn't return with the security pact that he had hoped for. Brett Lethbridge seems to have a PNG Pong paddle.
Yeah, which I do believe might have been supplied by China. They're not just building infrastructure there, they're giving sports equipment as well. But you notice Marape's got his hand behind his back, like he's not ready to catch that ball at all.
He's not going to show his cards.
No.
We're playing all right. It's not often the journalists make the news, but this week John Lyons became part of the story, the major part of the story.
John Lyons really hit a nerve with Donald Trump, but I also get the sense that that's not really hard to do with Donald Trump.
I don't think it is. David Pope, really first class here. Tall poppy syndrome. Tell the Australian Prime Minister to weed this one out.
Yeah, the details there of the other journalists completely prostrate, laying down before Donald Trump.
Mark Knight has beautifully drawn this. And, Elbow, does this belong to you? We need to talk.
And here's a minder over here, looking ashen. Looks like you've secured that Trump meeting.
Yeah, I think he might be spitting his morning coffee here. Look, it's been a great pleasure unpicking events this week, and I'll let you do the honours, Ben.
Thanks so much, Mike. Back to you, Mel.
Thanks, Ben, and thanks, Mike. All right, time for final observations. Peter.
Well, this week we saw that lovely fellow Vladimir Putin make 3 airspace intrusions into NATO countries, most recently fighter jets into Estonia. Can I just point out that he is conducting the same sort of incremental, cautious, yet unending hybrid war that our Chinese friends have been perpetrating against countries like Japan, the Philippines for years, and nobody has yet found a solution in either case.
Certainly a pattern of behaviour. Katina.
The Hilda data that was out on Friday was really interesting. One of its findings was that for the first time, the number of children that Australian men and women want on average has dropped below 2. I thought that that was really interesting in the context of the anxiety around immigration that we've seen on the right being kicked along by the far right in the coalition and the CPAC speeches that have had over the weekend. So there is going to need to be some kind of nuanced conversation around what Australia's population will have to look like in the future and how that happens.
Jennifer.
Chris Bowen was talking up the idea of the big climate summit being held in Adelaide next year, but Turkey is showing absolutely no signs of dropping out. So bad news for Adelaide. I think it's looking rather unlikely that Australia is going to have it. And I don't think there will be some people, at least in the Albanese government, who will be quite relieved about that, given the politics involved.
Again, another case where a failure might not necessarily be the worst outcome. All right, Jennifer Hewett from the Australian Financial Review, Katina Curtis from the West Australian, and Peter Hartcher from The Age and Sydney Morning Herald. Thank you very much. And finally, as journalists, we all work really hard to find out what's happening behind closed doors, and that includes the ABC's Marion Farr. And when she spoke to the PNG's Foreign Minister Justin Tatchenko to find out what was going on with that defence treaty, she found out that sometimes when you go looking for answers, all you get is more questions. We'll leave you with that. Thanks for watching.
Treaty with Australia going to be signed today?
I have no idea.
You're the Foreign Minister. How do you not have an idea about this?
Well, you know, things take time. We make sure things are done properly to everybody's benefit, long-term benefit. It's all good.
Has Cabinet approved this treaty?
Which treaty?
The treaty with Australia, the defence treaty.
Oh, it's a work in progress.
Okay, so that means it hasn't been approved by Cabinet?
You tell me.
You're making us all feel very excited about being here.